Viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Tonight on the agenda, John Michael McGrath and I with our weekly On Poly podcast.
The demand for supportive care for services that people dealing with addiction need is so much larger than what has been announced so far. This may be a perfectly valid model of care. I just don't think there's enough of it yet.
Hey there, partner.
Hello, sir.
Season 7, episode 1.
Can you believe? We were going over this before we started shooting, and we had count on both hands. Like, how many years has it been?
It's kind of crazy.
Yes, it's been a while.
Now, season 2 of being video,
yes,
of being visual, I guess, but season 7 altogether.
Yes.
And I don't know, there is something about you that just looks a little bit different, and I can't quite place it, or can I?
New glasses.
You got new glasses. They're absolutely stunning.
It caused some consternation among our supervisors about how the glasses would look on TV. I'm still getting used to being on TV and not making decisions based on how they will show up on camera.
Yeah, they're looking fine. They're looking fine. Just keep going with them. I see you've chosen a very impressive shirt today that makes a statement of absolutely nothing. Yeah, I don't know what's going on there. But anyway, how was the summer?
The summer was good. Lots of heat, took some time off, went to some places that were not TVO's offices in Toronto. How about yourself?
Well, as this shirt indicates, Tina, I don't know if you can come in and get a close-up on this, but destination Manitoulin Island. I'd love to spend a little bit of time on Manitoulin Island, the largest freshwater island in the world. And there's a little shirt showing some of the destinations that I actually managed to get to. And you know what? You and I think the last time we saw each other was at AMO, the annual conference of the Association of Municipalities of Ontario. And I drove from Manitoulin Island to Ottawa for the AMO conference. It's about 8 hours. It's a fabulous drive. It's so relaxing. It's wonderful. You remember, or I guess you get reminded, of how beautiful this province is. Some of the small rural places are just so wonderful, and how big it is, right? It takes a long time to get anywhere, but there we go.
Yeah, that's one of those drives that I have never done, and I would very much like to someday. It does make me think of, at the ground floor of Queen's Park, there is this enormous mural of the province of Ontario, and the first time I saw it, I recognized just how little of the province I had actually seen, right? I've lived my entire life basically shuttling between Ottawa and Toronto, and it's a big old province, man.
It sure is. I know that map. It's a very famous map, and you walk in there, and you look where Sudbury is. Sudbury we think of in Toronto. Sudbury's 4 hours up there.
Yeah.
That's not even people who live in the real north of this province don't think of Sudbury as Northern Ontario. And when you see that map, you realize they're right. Anyways, okay, shall we?
Let's do it.
Let's get on to issue 1. This is still week 1 for the province's new cell phone ban in Ontario classrooms. Last year, students, we suspect, frequently checked their phones in class and not necessarily for classwork. This year, they have been untethered from their devices for 4 days now, and to the best of my knowledge, the Earth is still rotating around. What are you doing over there? Now, for those who are listening on podcast,
sorry.
For those listening on podcast and can't tell, John Michael was on his cell phone the whole time there as I was reading that introduction. So very funny.
There are good tweets, and I need to read them all.
You are just doing exactly why they brought the cell phone ban in, which is not paying attention.
Well, as you might guess, enforcement is going to be an issue with this policy. High schoolers can be at least as disobedient as I can. Teachers have raised this issue with this policy. I think in their hearts, a lot of them agree, at least with the principle that, they want kids off of their phones unless they are being strictly instructed. And the policy does allow for the teachers to bring smartphones into the education process, to invite kids to do research on their phones, that kind of thing. But everything we're hearing from teachers is that their real concern is, will they be backed up by the principal, by the school board itself when it comes time to actually lay down the law?
That is key, right? The first time a teacher says, I'm sorry, you can't have that smartphone out, I'm going to have to confiscate it, and the first student who says, come and get it, and then whips it at the teacher or something like that. This is fraught with difficulty, and you can imagine that the media will make great hay of the first time that there is a confrontation in class. So, yeah, we got to see this play
And
out.
I mean, let's also talk about, there's a role for parents here, right? I mean, some parents don't want their kids to be out of contact like that, right? To have the phones turned off. And so there's going to be a negotiation process there as well.
On behalf of John Michael and myself, parents, there was a time when we all went to school without cell phones 24/7, and we were okay. You can allow your child not to have their cell phone open for your texts to make sure little Johnny and Janie are walking home for... Anyway, this can be done.
It can be done. Your children will survive. My kid still goes to school without a phone. It is possible.
Good for you. How old's your child now?
They'll be 9.
9 years old. Too early for a cell phone.
Yes.
I think. Anyway.
Well, it's a matter of debate in the household.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah. Well, okay, this actually is not the first time that there has been an attempt in this province to ban the use of cell phones. I think the Toronto District School Board tried it in 2007, which is a long time ago, but then they reversed the ban in 2011. How come?
Right. This was actually, I remember when this first unfolded, and, back in 2007, I think I kind of I'm not quite sure I rolled my eyes at the idea, like, good luck with that. But they did eventually reverse the ban, and they said at the time that it was an issue of equity, that, kids in the modern environment, kids do need access to the internet to do a lot of their school work, a lot of their research, for example. But some kids don't have laptops, some kids don't have computers, and really the only affordable access they have to the internet is their phones. So that was one issue. It was also causing a lot of conflict between teachers and students, and so that was part of the reason that they reversed the ban in 2011. But this year, before the province announced its own policy, the TDSB had already started a process of consulting parents about re-implementing a new ban. That process obviously got a bit short-circuited by the provincial announcement. The TDSB issued a statement saying that they're welcoming any measures that improve student performance in class, but I think they had hoped to go through a bit more consultation with parents before.
Let's do one more observation on this, and this admittedly is a little more political as opposed to policy, but this was the cell phone ban and the vaping ban as well, which we should also point out. They're putting vape detectors in bathrooms now in schools, right?
Yes.
Some of that coming. This was the first big announcement for Jill Dunlop, who's the new education minister, unexpectedly found herself with that job just a few weeks ago. And it was interesting, at least I thought it was worth noting, she did not make the announcement at Queen's Park in the media studio, which is where you traditionally make a big announcement that you want a lot of reporters to come to and report on. She did it up in Caledon, which is a long way from Queen's Park.
Yes.
How come?
Well, I also know it's a long way from Queen's Park. It's also not her riding. She's a Barrie MPP, so that would have been one obvious explanation. But the last time Minister Dunlop held a press conference at Queen's Park, it was as the Minister of Colleges and Universities. It was when she was announcing the province's sort of partial bailout of universities after the changes in federal international student rules. And I think it's fair to say that press conference did not go well. It was a pan as a bit of a non-announcement, and then a very aggressive question and answer period with reporters who got non-answer after non-answer. One doesn't want to be overly suspicious. It's our first day back. Let's not be too cynical. But, the plan might have been just to get her as far away from Queen's Park as possible. Hope that relatively few reporters would show up, that maybe they wouldn't have their dander up and ask those same aggressive style of questions. As a media strategy, it seems to have worked. Very few reporters showed up. The minister made the announcement, answered 2 questions, and walked off.
As we are about to the next item. On to issue 2. This week also represents the beginning of the biggest liberalization in alcohol sales perhaps in Ontario history. More than 4,000 corner stores are now eligible to sell beer and wine on premises. That said, many stores still have "coming soon" signs up, so shelves still need to be stocked. JMM, okay, we didn't just get here yesterday. This has been a long time coming. You want to take us through some of how we got here?
Right. I mean, depending on where you want it, I mean, you could start this story back in 2015 when Kathleen Wynne first opened up beer and wine sales in grocery stores. But let's narrow it down a bit more to back in May. Premier Doug Ford announced that the province was going to end the Master Framework Agreement. This is the agreement between the province of Ontario and the beer store. They were going to end the agreement earlier than expected. They are paying something like a quarter billion, $200 million to the beer store, if I remember correctly, to break the agreement early, and that is at some of the costs. The Liberal Party, of course, has put out an estimate. They claim that the policies as announced by the government could end up costing the Ontario government as much as $1 billion. We've talked about this before. I think there's fair reasons to criticize some of those estimates, but the range is, between $200 million and $1 billion, say.
They still have the best alliteration going, though.
Yes.
What was it again?
It was
Bad booze
billion-dollar boondoggle.
Billion-dollar booze boondoggle, right. Yeah.
And, of course, this is not the end of the liberalization that is coming. Big box stores like your Costco's will be able to sell beer and wine by the end of October.
Somewhere, David Peterson is smiling. And I say that for those of you who are of a certain age. David Peterson was running for office in 1985 as the Ontario Liberal leader when he made the first promise to put beer and wine in the corner stores. And it is finally happening almost 40 years later. How about that?
I think it is a mark of just how even relatively straightforward things in politics can end up being difficult, and there's a whole long story about why this has ended up being difficult, but here we are, beer and wine in corner stores.
Indeed. Now, for our next segment, or not next segment, but for the next clip we want to play here, we want to give full props to Richard Southern, who's a fine reporter with City News, who, when this rolled out earlier this week, was it this week or last?
It was this week.
This week, yeah. He put some tough questions to Premier Doug Ford. I think he made the following point, hard drugs are drugs, cannabis is a drug, alcohol is a drug. Yeah. Why has the province banned the first two anywhere close to schools or childcare centers, but apparently it's damn the torpedoes when it comes to the sale of alcohol. You can do that anywhere you want. Okay, tough question from Richard, and here's what the Premier had to say. Let's roll it.
Your government prevents the sale of cannabis close to schools and will soon prevent safe consumption sites from operating close to schools. This Thursday, however, more than 4,100 convenience stores will start selling alcohol. Many of them are located close to schools.
Richard, let's be fair. You're comparing a convenience store to a safe consumption site, injection sites. Last time I checked, the convenience stores don't have needles lying around the front of their stores.
I have to just observe the Premier loves these Q&A exchanges with reporters because oftentimes he's very, very good at kind of ignoring the heart of the question and making a very jovial point about something else. You could tell from his demeanor there, he didn't like the question, and he really didn't like the fact that he was having to answer it. No. What'd you think?
I mean, it's a fair question, right? I mean, cannabis retailers are not allowed to operate within 150 meters of a school. They have to have their windows blacked out. There's all sorts of policies we have that are explicitly justified as protecting children from cannabis retail. So why would a convenience store be allowed to sell alcohol that close to a school? In terms of public health harms, I mean, I'm not breaking any new ground here, right? Alcohol arguably causes more deaths and more chronic illness than other drugs. That was part of the rationale for legalizing cannabis back in the day, that it was not, in fact, as harmful as alcohol. We know at least, some of the expansion of alcohol liberalization has had some bad effects in Ontario. There's a study suggesting that expansion we mentioned in 2015 into grocery stores linked to an increase of 17.8% in ER visits. Now, 17.8% may not sound like a lot, but it is twice as fast as the growth rate of all other causes of ER visits in the same period. So it was a very substantial increase at the time.
It really depends how you see the issue. The Premier clearly sees this as an issue of convenience for consumers. Yes. There is, of course, the other side of the coin, which is it's a public health issue as well. What are you hearing on that?
Well, and I think it's possible to agree that both are true, right? We know how prohibition fails, and when we talk about cannabis or alcohol, we have that history. We know what that means. But the experts, particularly public health experts, are really concerned about what this could mean. Dr. Kieran Moore, the province's chief medical officer of health, made a number of recommendations, such as increasing the minimum legal drinking age. The Premier and the government have opposed that. They are not considering that. But I do want to focus on this a little bit. Dr. Moore issued his annual report earlier this year, and it makes for sobering reading, if I can make a pun, about the rising levels of drug use across a number of areas, legalized cannabis, expanded alcohol use, the rise of vaping. We talked about the schools installing vape detectors. There's just a lot of legalized and hopefully this is safer regulated drug use in that sense, but it is increasing in ways that certainly Dr. Moore finds alarming.
Let's stay with this issue of drug safety because the experts, the people who follow science on this, also warn against the closure of those supervised drug sites, drug consumption sites. They say there is data, studies that show that these sites reduce the overdose mortality and the burden on the healthcare system. The government has been persuaded by other evidence that they find more compelling, such as?
Well, I mean, the Premier mentioned discarded needles, and I think there's been a number of sort of high-profile cases of public disorder. There was a tragic shooting of a young mother in downtown Toronto
a year ago.
Yeah. I know that I think if insofar as you can point to a single cause for the government's change in policy, I think that's probably one of them. There have been communities who have reacted very strongly against these safe consumption sites because of that sort of sense of disorder among them. But at the same time, as you say, staff and other experts have warned that these places do save lives, and closing them without an adequate replacement will cost lives. Now, the government, when we say replacement, the government has announced that they are establishing what they're calling homelessness and addiction recovery treatment or heart hubs model. This is going to provide beds and access to housing and supportive care. I wrote about this for the TVO.org website when the policy was announced. I just think that insofar as what has been announced so far, there's really no chance that this is going to be sufficient. The demand for supportive care for services that people dealing with addiction need is so much larger than what has been announced so far. This may be a perfectly valid model of care. I just don't think there's enough of it yet. And so
they also promised to have them up and rolling by next March, which seems very ambitious.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the easy joke is to say that you and I are still waiting for the Eglinton Crosstown to open.
Yes, we are.
Maybe the government will get them all open by the end of March. I certainly hope they do. This is not an area where I'm rooting for the government to fail, but I'm pessimistic. Let me put it that way.
And with that, we're off to issue 3. No, there is not going to be a provincial election this year. Premier Ford confirmed that this week. But yes, you folks who live in the Bay of Quinte area, that's Prince Edward County and such, you will have an election on September 19th. You've got to replace Todd Smith, the former education minister, who quit politics altogether after just a few weeks in that portfolio. JMM, tell us about that riding.
Well, this riding has been held comfortably by the Tories as long as Smith has been there. That said, it was also a Liberal riding before the 2011 election. The McGuinty Liberals held it for for I guess 3 cycles then?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yep.
But as with a lot of parts of Ontario, particularly outside of the GTHA and other big cities, one of those ridings where it flipped in the 2011 election, and Smith had hung on to it since then.
Yeah, normally we wouldn't spend a lot of time thinking about this, if not for the case that we had a situation about a year ago in Kanata-Carleton in Eastern Ontario where this was thought to be a reliably conservative riding. But the people in that area were really unhappy with the Ford Conservatives, and as a result, for the first time ever, they put a Liberal in the by-election in Kanata-Carleton. And given that it happened there, some people are asking the question, do you think history could repeat? And the answer is what?
Well, maybe. The issue in Canada Carleton, or one of the issues in Canada Carleton, was there was a specific sort of hyper-local issue about the conversion of a golf course into housing that the province, people locally were begging the province to stop it. The province did not. I don't think there's that kind of a lightning rod issue currently in the Bay of Quinte, although I could be missing something. I can't swear to have exhaustively researched all of the local issues right now. The Liberals have snagged themselves a prominent city councillor and former broadcaster, or maybe current broadcaster, as their candidate. Todd Smith himself was a former broadcaster before getting into provincial politics. So this might help them. It will be definitely worth watching.
Last time you and I gathered, which was in Ottawa at AMO, Todd Smith had left, but we didn't know where he was going. Now we know where he's going. He is becoming or I guess he has become, the Vice President for Marketing and Business Development at Can-Do Energy. So, he's always been a pretty energetic guy, and now he's in the nuclear business, which, he was a big booster of when he was the minister.
Yes, and, some might see the optics issues here. A very recent energy minister goes to work for an energy company, and in being the Ontario energy minister, you are kind of like a minister for nuclear energy in particular. He's now working for a big nuclear company. The Ontario government is right now, as we speak, contemplating a major new nuclear build-out at Bruce, on top of the refurbishments that we're already doing with Can-Do technology. There's a live issue here that Can-Do is very much tied up with. That said, Smith and Can-Do both cleared his new job with Ontario's Integrity Commissioner. They say that he will be working primarily with foreign clients and will not be addressing Canada or Ontario issues.
That's worth mentioning, that he does have this official good housekeeping seal of approval, and excuse me. And I'd also say Todd Smith is a widely respected guy at Queen's Park. He's a guy who's acted with integrity during his political career. However, having said that, opposition politicians are certainly not prepared to let this one go. It always does look a little eyebrow-raising when, for example, the Chief of Staff to the Minister of Housing suddenly leaves and gets a job with the Ontario Home Builders Association, for example.
Yes.
Or the former Minister of Energy leaves his portfolio and gets a job with a nuclear energy operation. Is this a thing?
It is. Optically, it is definitely a thing. It is good that Smith got this cleared with the Integrity Commissioner. MPPs and former MPPs should both obey the law and be seen to obey the law. But I do want to say, if Bruce Power does decide to go with Can-Do technology for this big new build that is being contemplated, it's not going to be because Todd Smith got a job with Can-Do, right?
They were going there anyway.
Yeah. It's going to be because Bruce and OPG, they have decades of experience with Can-Do technology. There are already 8 Can-Do reactors running up at the Bruce nuclear station. They are a known quantity as far as reactor technology goes. And there's enormous political pressure in Ontario and in Canada to support this made in Canada industrial champion. So, Todd Smith's new gig is like a rounding error on a rounding error on top of all of that. It is just not going to factor into a decision like this, at least, not in the sort of the crass way that people might think.
And with that, it's off to your column, my column. Okay, friends, it's time now for our regular feature, Your Column, My Column, in which JMM and I reminisce about the columns we wrote for TVO.org over the past little while. JMM, start us off. What do you got?
I wrote about batteries last week.
Batteries, like the ones I put in my flashlight?
Yes, those. Also the ones that you have a plug-in hybrid car, so batteries in there. We talk a lot about EV batteries and the money that the government is spending on luring EV jobs to Ontario. But it's also changing the entire electricity sector in some really interesting ways. Just last week, Energy Minister Stephen Lecce, Todd Smith's successor, announced a new procurement for electricity that is going to include renewables, or it may include renewables. But I'm actually at the moment finding the batteries more interesting than renewables, and I find renewables fascinating on their own. But states like California and Texas have added huge amounts of battery capacity to their electricity system, and one of the things that it is doing is really changing the way that those electricity grids use natural gas, for example. I get into this a bit more in the piece, but it's a really interesting, really profound change in the way we use electricity, and it looks like it is going to just accelerate even more because the prices of batteries are falling so quickly,
Yes.
and are likely to continue falling in price at least for a bit longer. So anyway, I wrote about all of that. It is enough to make you a little bit sympathetic for the government because things are moving so quickly that it's very hard to make a decision. Any choice you make forecloses another choice in the future, and you've got to be really sure that you're making the right choice when you do. And I don't know how they could be certain.
It is hard to be the decider.
Yes.
It is hard to be the decider. Yeah.
And what about you, Steve?
When you and I were in Ottawa for AMO, I decided to get a hold of Jim Watson, who was the former mayor of Ottawa, and essentially I wanted to get together for a couple of reasons. Number one, it was when we went out for breakfast. It was the 5th anniversary of his having made the announcement that he was coming out of the closet and acknowledging that he was going to live his life as an openly gay man for the first time ever. And I just wanted to get a sense about what post-political life for him in general was like. Sheldon, you want to bring that picture up? Here's Jim Watson. Snapped that picture of him just after our breakfast was over. Got the smile on his face. He's an amiable guy. He was a well-liked mayor. He got 3 terms as the mayor of the super city of Ottawa, and he'd been a city councillor and a mayor previously. He was in Dalton McGuinty's government as a cabinet minister as well. Okay, this is really disgraceful, but I got to tell this story because he says 95% of the interactions that he's had with people since he came out have been positive, and he gets a boost from those. But one day he came home and he found written, spray painted on his driveway, effing, and then a word that begins with F that, because this is a family broadcast, I'm not going to say out loud, but that was spray painted on his driveway.
Yes.
And he also says that occasionally when he's walking around town, it happened to him at the mall not too long ago, one of his local malls, somebody actually in public shouted at him, "You effing," and again, the F word.
Yes.
And, he acknowledges that even though that's only 5% of his interactions with the public, it's pretty soul-destroying in 2024 in a major city in this country, in the capital city of this country, to have to deal with that. Anyway, there's that issue. The other issue we talked about, of course, was the LRT,
Yes.
which was supposed to be a big signature project of his second and third terms. Has not gone as well as people hoped. I think is a massive understatement. There was a public inquiry called into what the hell went wrong with that whole thing. And he does get occasionally some shouts from the public as to, you ought to be in jail for the way that thing went down.
Yeah.
Anyway, the post-political life of Jim Watson, all available at TVO.org on our website.
I did enjoy reading that, but I do have to ask, what did you have for breakfast, Mr. Watson?
That is the big question.
Yes.
I'm afraid that's a national security secret, and I cannot share that. But let's suffice to say, 2 guys in their 60s were not having the pancakes or the waffles. We had pretty sensible, healthy meals, as I recall.
Like cottage cheese in a fruit cup.
Something like that. Yeah, something like that.
All right. With that, let's go to the mailbag.
If you've got a burning question for us or an insightful comment, we always like to get them. Send it at onpolitics@tvo.org. JMM, what's our letter/email/tweet this week?
Yeah, this one we're going to lift from X, formerly Twitter, X-user T.Resident, who asks, how will the new election spending limits apply if Ford calls an early election? They go on to mention that limits apply to spending within 6 months of an election. Spring is less than 6 months away.
That is a great question because, how do you know when to start the 6-month clock if you're calling an election a year before you're not supposed to, but provided for by law?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, you're the lawyer here, or are you? You want to take this one on?
Okay, I'm going to say my line. I am not a lawyer. I'm just playing one on TV. But this is an interesting question, both for what the law says and what the government said when they passed that law. So T.Resident here is referring to the election spending changes that were brought in by the Ford government in 2021, I believe. They invoked the notwithstanding clause to pass this law after a court had found it unconstitutional. So there were 2 parts to the law. The first was spending limits for third parties. That's anybody who's not a political party or a registered candidate. Those spending limits applied during the writ period from the moment when the lieutenant governor dissolves the legislature to voting day, like 5 weeks or so. Those were uncontroversial. The Supreme Court had ruled on third-party spending limits like a generation ago. That wasn't the problem. The issue and the reason why the notwithstanding clause was invoked was the third-party spending limits for the year before the writ. That was a very big expansion of the spending limits, and court believed that the government had not really justified that intrusion on people's free speech rights. The government used the notwithstanding clause anyway. So how does this work with the law or the idea of an early election, right? That 12-month period before an election is in the law, it is pegged to the fixed election date. That is supposed to be in June of 2026. If they call a spring election, if the government calls a spring election in 2025, that period, that pre-writ spending limit period will not occur. It will not be in place. There will not be spending limits for third parties.
So theoretically, we are in the wild, wild west here where it's damn the torpedoes, spend whatever you want?
Not quite. The writ period spending limits will still apply right from the moment the legislature is dissolved. But if you think about, like, you and I remember elections before the fixed election date, right? There's always that period where everybody knows the election is coming, but it hasn't started yet. And so if we get to, let's say, January or February, and everybody's pretty sure the election's coming, but the call has not formally been made, that's going to be the critical period where groups like unions or business groups, any of these registered third parties, I mean, working families, right? The union-affiliated group that targeted the PCs in multiple election cycles, right? They will actually have a lot more freedom to spend in a potential early spring election certainly than they had in the last cycle in 2022.
Oh, we can't wait. Is there more?
Right. So this is the other thing. And I do want to remind people, when the government brought in this law, they literally called it the Protecting Elections and Defending Democracy Act. And this was so important that they invoked the notwithstanding clause to get it passed without court scrutiny and in defiance of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, right? The Premier said it was necessary to protect our elections from American-style super PACs. And if the government calls a spring election, they will have effectively decided that it really wasn't that important after all.
It's funny how that works out, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the government is important. I think politics are important. I try to take this stuff seriously, and then every once in a while something happens, and you're like, I'm not sure people are taking this as seriously as I am.
Gotcha. Well, that was a great, thank you, T.Resonant. That was a terrific post, and why don't you give the email address in case others want to do the same?
Again, if you would like to ask about content on the show, please email us at onpolitics@tvo.org or give us a shout out on X, Instagram, or on our other social media channels. I'm on Blue Sky a lot these days, but yeah, they're all over.
Blue Sky's nice, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a little more civilized.
Yeah, fewer Nazis.
That's always a good thing. Well, that is the On Poly podcast for this Friday, September 6, 2024. Now, stay tuned for a conversation from the Women's Leadership Forum, which was presented by the Association of Municipalities of Ontario and hosted by our very own Namki Wanuka. And until next Friday, everybody, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
We're thrilled to be joined by three influential women leaders who work in areas that intersect with municipalities. We'll hear about their journeys and insights into the challenges that, despite it being 2024, still exist today. We welcome Tabitha Bull, the President and CEO of the Canadian Council for Indigenous Business, Lisa Laurent, President of the Canadian Association of Women in Construction and President of RSG International, and Dion Sinclair, Vice President of Clinical Operations and Chief Nursing Executive at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. It's an honor to share the stage and to learn from you today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
I was born during a civil war and lived in a refugee camp, and I never could have imagined the life that I have today. The fact that I'm sitting here on stage with the three of you, sitting in front of an audience of some of the most influential people in the province. I wanted to ask you a question about when you think about when you were, say, 10, 11, 12, what would you say to your 10-year-old self about the journey to come, and what would you say to her about staying the course when it was difficult? Dion, I'll start with you.
All right, so thank you. Thank you very much for that question. And to my 10-year-old self, I would say, keep going. Disregard all the naysayers. You can do this, and it is worth it in the end.
What about when it got difficult? What would you say to her?
When it got difficult, call your mom. A lot of times you don't listen to her, but mothers know best. And I have to say, many times going through school wasn't easy. I wanted to quit. It's like, I can just be an RPN and I'll just do this. And mom said, nope, you're going to keep going, so listen to your mother.
I'm going to send that to my kids right now. What about you, Lisa?
I think I would say find your community. One of the things I've found throughout my journey is that you need to surround yourself with people that support you, that believe in you. Otherwise, you'll just be, you won't surround yourself with the positive people, and I think that that's really important. My journey into the construction industry was very, very difficult, and I actually thought I was alone. And one of the reasons that I actually sought out the Canadian Association of Women in Construction, or CAWIC, was because I needed to find some like-minded women that were in similar positions to myself, so the guidance and advice, and just feel like I wasn't alone and I wasn't, that there was a light at the end of the tunnel, or that I could be successful at the end of the journey. So I think I would tell my 10-year-old self, find your community, always remember that failure is not the end. It's very, very important when you talk to entrepreneurs, successful entrepreneurs, they all say the road was very difficult, they failed, they got back up, they tried again, and I think that's very important. I do tell some women, it's okay if you've been fired. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, you just find a different path, or you find a company that is aligned with your career goals or your core values, or you look at even starting your own business. And I think the opportunities are there for everybody. We just have to show courage, empathy, and continue.
I think that's so great for you to say that, because I think we often look at failure as, there's nothing else left. But I've learned in my 4 decades on the planet is like failure is actually information.
Yeah,
right?
I agree.
Could your 10-year-old self have imagined the life that you're living right now?
Absolutely not. Yeah. Absolutely not. And my father was an immigrant to the country. And it's interesting, as I went through some Equity 101 training, I thought that I grew up in Northern Ontario. My father's first language wasn't English, so I thought that I didn't come from this place of privilege until I actually went through some Equity 101 training and understanding is I have privilege. And one of the things I'd like to be able to do is use my voice for others that don't have the same privilege in life or the same voice. But as my 10-year-old, I thought I was going to grow up in Northern Ontario, and Toronto was the big city. I never thought I'd see the light of day down here.
Well, look at you now.
Yeah, thank you.
And what about you, Tabitha?
I think I would say to look for something that you feel really passionate about and believe in your work and in your journey. It's really important. For me, it was very important as a mom, leaving and working while I was raising my children, for me to be going to doing a job that I really believed in and I thought was going to make a difference. That made it a lot easier for me to get on a plane and miss field trips and concerts when I could really explain, but I'm doing this because it's making a difference and supporting people and our people. And I think I'd also say to really find your value and believe in your value. And as Indigenous people, one of our teachings is around humility, so it's very hard sometimes to really put your value out there and really believe in your value, but it's very important as women for us to ensure that we're really sitting within our value. And as an Indigenous woman, for me to really hold on to that and express that isn't something that comes naturally to me, but it's really ensured that I've been able to sit in places and at tables that I never would have imagined I'd be able to sit at.
And to celebrate your accomplishments.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think it's one thing for us to be co-signed onto the agreement that women who are leading need the support.
Yeah.
I've had trouble voicing my ambition, and I think when it comes to women, ambition is still kind of like a dirty word. Were you ever scared about voicing voicing your ambitions? Were you ever nervous about actually saying out loud what it is that you wanted to do? I see you smiling, Lisa. I'll give it to you first.
I think definitely. I think, you know, as a woman, and I had great career goals. I always wanted to be CEO of a company. If you were to talk to my 15-year-old self, that's exactly what I wanted to do.
That's very specific.
It's truly, and you know, actually anybody that you would meet said I should have probably been a lawyer. Because it was very important for me to get my view across and my point across, and I couldn't understand why my voice wasn't carrying any weight, or I would be coming into a room as an adult with all men, and why my voice was much less than I just didn't understand it. It didn't make any sense to me. I've always been about, you know, diversity and equity and inclusion, and I think that together, I don't want all people that look like me, think like me, because we'll never make good decisions. It's nice to have this, you know, diversified approach to things, so you can say, I actually didn't look at things that way, or, you know what, I don't know what it's like to walk in your shoes, so maybe we should change something else. And I think, Tabitha, you had a really good example about, we schedule board meetings in the summer, first thing in the morning when you're trying to get your kids to camp. So if you want women to participate in boards, then you need to actually adjust just the way that what we do. And we could schedule that meeting at 10 o'clock. There's nothing wrong with that. So it's just interesting that as we just don't voice that enough to say we want to be included and we want to be at the table, but maybe we have to change a few things because everybody looks at it to some degree as a threat. And I think the more ambitious that you are, and the more that you get your point across, and you say to people, we're here to be successful, to participate, and to be leaders, and to show the next generation to represent that we can be here, and we bring a lot to the table.
What about you, Tabitha?
Yeah, I think, you know, when I first came into this role as CEO, I did a talk with Ivy School about leadership, and one of the students asked me what I thought about imposter syndrome. And no word of a lie, I had to Google what imposter syndrome was. Luckily, it was a virtual call, and I could quickly, on my phone. But not to say that I never had that. I think it's just that we keep coming up with new names for things that are natural feelings for everybody to feel.
So imposter syndrome is basically like you don't feel like you belong.
Yeah, and you're like, what am I doing here? I shouldn't be here. This is bigger than I am. And I have those thoughts all the time, and it's particularly in this role, I've had these incredible opportunities to be a voice at the North American Leadership Summit, as an example, in Mexico City. Canada did a really great job of having women and Indigenous women there, 2 Indigenous women there. None of the other countries had any Indigenous representation there, and one country only had 1 woman. But to have the opportunity to be the voice, it's so important to me, and it's such an incredible opportunity that I have this opportunity to hold the microphone. So definitely in those moments, I am thinking, what am I doing here? And if I would have thought of my 15-year-old self, that's what I want to be doing, never in a million years would I have considered that. But I think equally important is if I have that mic, the opportunity to share it with other people that are at the table as well.
And for Dion, for you grew up in my hometown of London, Ontario, and when you were in school, a teacher had essentially decided what you were capable of. Mm-hmm. So how did you confront that?
For me, it was understanding my roots and where I came from. I was told I wasn't college or university material. However, I didn't believe it because leaving Jamaica, I was told I was a scholarship girl, meaning I'm the best and one of the brightest. And so I took that with me coming to Canada as an immigrant. I have to just say that I've always shared with others what I want to be because they're my best allies. If I tell someone I'd like to be a CEO, then the next time you're in a room where somebody is saying, hey, we might need an interim CEO somewhere, someone would speak up and say, well, I heard that Dion, that she was at this panel, she says she wants that. So someone can actually speak your name in rooms where opportunities being discussed if they know what your thoughts and dreams are. Mm-hmm. So I always share with people I mentor, let others know what your goals and dreams are. They can assist you. And I just have to comment on the imposter syndrome because I thought I had that growing up and going through different leadership positions. And then I was told, no, check yourself and find out if it's not imposter treatment.
Yes,
Sometimes you go into rooms and people treat you like you don't belong, treat you like you're not qualified, treat you like that's not your room. You shouldn't be there. And so if you decide that, no, I am qualified, I have experience, I do belong here, I have something to contribute, it's no longer imposter syndrome, but you might call it imposter treatment, and then that's a projection from somebody else onto you.
And I imagine too, it probably gets a little, sorry, I heard a few claps. I imagine too, it probably gets a little exhausting too, because you're trying to explain why you're in the rooms that you are in, when you're also trying to just contribute and be a part of the team. And Dion, you had an interesting take on tokenism. How would you describe tokenism then?
Well, when it comes to people thinking, oh, well, she's just here because she's black. One of the things I do know, I studied very hard to get where I am. I have 2 master's degrees. I've got the BSCN. I'm a certified healthcare executive. I understand who I am and what I've done to get where I am. So I'm not feeling sorry for those people who try to treat me like a token. However, they're just ill-informed. And sometimes I don't have time to inform them, but my work demonstrates for itself.
When we talk about solutions, do you think that diversity, equity, and inclusion is still part of that conversation?
Oh, definitely, yeah. And I think, I always say it's a journey, it's not a destination. And it's ever evolving, and we're learning. And the only way we're going to get, and if we just, a diverse population in and represented, is at some point you're going to have to you're going to have to change the way that we do things, because you have, as some women come out of the workforce and then come back in, we have this gap. So and when you're looking at it now, they're calling it the broken rung. So you have the young generation coming up, you've got this middle management that there's nobody in there, so there's nobody to follow. And we have women in senior leadership roles in all kinds of industries that are now leaving because of burnout. So I think that we need to continue to talk, we need to continue to tell our stories, we need to continue to tell people it still exists. And the only way we're going to make change is to use our voices for those people that we can't hear their voices or they don't want to use their voices, and we have to do this together. We won't make any changes unless we do this together. And if you look even statistically, that if you have women on your senior leadership team, you're 20% more profitable than those businesses that don't. Sure. And in Canada, there's only 1 in 4 women in C-level positions, and I think for black women, it's 1 in 16. So you think of, even if I can say my journey is difficult, your journey is much more difficult than mine. That's what we have to change. And I'm thinking the numbers are even worse for Indigenous women. So we are the change. We are going to get the words out there. We're not, it's not about, grandstanding. We need allies. We need people to work with us. We need to support one another as women. And we need to show this generation that we can do this.
Yeah, we need sponsorship.
We need sponsorship, yeah.
Tabitha?
Yeah, I think, I agree with everything you've said. And the more and more that we look at corporate organizations as well, so our organization, CCIB, has been around for 40 years, and we were, established on building relationships between Indigenous businesses and non-Indigenous businesses. And it's been 40 years. Like, we're still seeing the need for an organization such as ours and the need to really build those bridges. And we heard, almost every speaker today talk about Indigenous reconciliation and about reconciliation action plans. And if there is still not a push through Truth and Reconciliation Commission or through UNDRIP for organizations and municipalities and communities to really understand what it means to be inclusive of the Indigenous communities in your territory, if that push isn't there, we're going to move back to where we were 40 years ago. And I completely agree on employment as well. We really look at, we do see an increase in Indigenous people and Indigenous women into organizations, but if that organization isn't really looking across the organization at what they're doing to support Indigenous communities as well, and aren't good actors with Indigenous people, those people leave. And I think more and more we see young people who are really it's really important to them, the values of the company that they work for. And that, that's the same for consumers as well. Really important to understand the values of the consumer. And we see that in environment, but I think we're going to continue to see that more and more in equity and inclusion.
And I think in construction, we're looking at a labor shortage. And I say that, you know what, if you want to attract top talent and you want people to work for your organization, you can't only have a DEI policy. You actually have to have this inclusive, equitable organization, because people they're just not going to stay. The young generation, they didn't grow up with this now in their schools. I interviewed a young lawyer, she went to Queen's University in Kingston, her parents are international teachers, so she has international experience, there was lots of women in her school, lots of women in her law school. She chose a law firm that had a lot of women partners, didn't experience any of this, gets in, and her first client says, oh, are you my lawyer? Oh, no, I'd like an older man, please. The judge isn't going to take you seriously. So she said, I had no idea how to deal with that. I was not prepared. I didn't have the skills or the tools, because now I didn't experience it throughout my life up until this point, and now I'm in my early 20s, and all of a sudden I'm exposed to it. So that's why I think we have to continue to talk about it, that it exists, and how do we make those changes.
And Dion, hearing that story, I'm sure it must be disappointing, because when you were starting out, I was reading something that said there was a patient that refused you because of your skin color.
They did not want a black nurse to look after them. However, they didn't have a choice, because most of us on the unit at the bedside were diverse. So my mom calls it kill them with kindness. I was the one who did everything, do the bath, comb the hair, brush the dentures, every single thing. And at the end, somebody was extremely grateful for the care, and I'm going to just change that perception. I'm not sure what they were brought up with or what they thought, but leaving that room I felt really good, to the point where it was, are you coming back tomorrow? And it's like, I'll be back tomorrow. So
because it's about the care, it's not about the...
There you go. And I didn't take it personal, but boy, am I ever going to change your heart and mind of what you thought.
Do you think that women lead differently?
Yes.
Yes.
How?
So, I think, again, if we go back to COVID and we look at the countries that did really well of COVID, those were countries that were led by women, Finland, New Zealand. But I think, and I don't say this is for all, not in general, of course there's always people. I think women really think more about the whole picture. And I think we're also, and maybe this is a bit of that we're allowed to, and men maybe don't feel that they're allowed to, but we lead more with heart. So for me, the greatest part of my job is that I'm able to create a space in an environment in my organization where people can actually put themselves and their families first. Mm-hmm. And for my team to really feel that their mental health is first, that their kids are first. If something happens in their family, cousin, it doesn't have to meet the bereavement policy if your family needs you to be there. And particularly, in Indigenous culture, where we're all cousins and aunties and uncles, and you need to be there if somebody needs you. Yep. And it's a privilege for me that I can lead an organization, that I can give that opportunity to my team. And I think, corporate Canada still isn't there, so not necessarily that if you were a woman in that space. I don't know if it's so much about being a woman as it is about the culture of an organization. But I think that we do really, that heart is part of the leadership. And to me, heart-centered leadership is something that is going to be able to ensure that we're moving forward and people are sticking around.
And I agree, and I think that we lead with empathy and courage and collaboration, and it's not about necessarily winning, it's about how we're going to get there and how everybody's going to participate in that and how we're going to be successful as a team, and that, everybody should have the ability to be promoted, and we should be looking, I like the best person for the job, but you're only going to get the best person to the job if you have this inclusive environment, that everybody actually has this equal opportunity to be able to get there. So I do think that that's what women bring to the table. I also think we're not afraid of failure, so that we'll go out, we'll take risks, we'll take chances, because we build this team around us that will support us, and we collaborate, so we're much more comfortable with the decision making than that will be successful with the decisions that we make.
And the role of a leader really is to grow future leaders.
Yeah.
And as a leader, you're looking out for who has that ambition or who is seeking opportunities, and you nurture that, you coach, mentor, sponsor. And when it really comes down to it, you're looking for who's going to take, well, for nursing,
agreed.
who's looking after me
Yeah.
so you want to train up the next generation so they do well. And you're thinking that give someone else that opportunity. And when you do that, it just makes it better for everyone. And people want to come to that environment where they feel that they have opportunity. And if you show up in a place, it's like, well, I can't move up from here, no one's staying that long.
People will stay if they feel, they'll give everything and they'll be rewarded for it. We've got 3 minutes. I'm going to ask this question, and I'll give you all 45 seconds to respond to it, please. What would you like to say to the policymakers and politicians who are in this room when it comes to how women in leadership can be supported? Dion, I'll start with you.
Ensure that there are opportunities. Even if it's just an internship, bring someone in that looks different than yourselves and give them that opportunity to see what you can do, learn about what you do, because I came yesterday and I walked around and I did not even know half the things that were happening. It's like, wow, maybe I will get into municipal government just to, be part of it.
I think you need to celebrate women. I think you need to highlight what we do and find a mechanism to be able to do that and to support initiatives like KWIC that we're trying to be a national voice for women that are in construction, so to support that way. But again, support women.
Yeah, I think I would say to invite women to the table. So if you might not have someone in the position of hierarchy that your organization would typically invite in a woman in one of those positions, ensure that you invite them anyway. And it not only gives you exposure to like a diverse thought, but it also gives them an exposure to like, how does this table work? How does the boardroom table work? How does the opportunity to present to this group of people work? Even as like those learnings come. And I'd also say, as we think about diverse boards and diverse advisory councils, perhaps in the political sphere, if you have a commitment to ensure that you're diversifying the table, and you think you can't find a candidate, first, that's probably not true. Right. But second, leave that chair empty until you actually fill the chair. Yeah. Don't just fill the chair. Leave it empty, and every time you're at a meeting, you're going to look at that chair and think, we still haven't found somebody to fill that chair.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you and learning from you. And thank you so much to the audience here. And thank you to AMO and Sabine for the invite again. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next week on the agenda.
There are people who want to live in a civil society, who want to solve our problems, want to talk to each other, whether they agree with each other or not, want to find a way to start solving our problems collectively, because we face enormous problems.
That's next week on the agenda.